Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Upside Swings NBA Draft Podcast, the podcast of the highest ceiling. I'm your host, Bryce Hendricks, joined as always by the great Cooper Klein, and we're here to talk about the third and kind of the first overall pick running, though some people have started bringing up the name Darius Acuff, and so maybe we'll see. I don't think he's going to get a solo pod, but my strong feeling is that he will not crack this conversation for either of us. But Darryn Peterson, super intriguing, was my preseason number one based on some high school stuff. And also, I feel like he's the easiest guy to split the difference on. And we'll talk about that when we talk about all three of these guys in general. But it's like, AJ, these extreme strengths and weaknesses, and Boozer's kind of the opposite in terms of extreme strengths and weaknesses, and felt like Peterson kind of fit nicely in the middle. But before we get into Peterson himself, Coop, my friend, how's it going?
It's going great. I think the best part of saving Peterson for last is watching him after DeBonsa and kind of framing the discussion. Like every single clip you watch or every single game you watch of Darryn Peterson, you're like, oh, you kind of get to compare the two scorers against one another in a very direct way, and then you watch them play each other. And I think it's really a super interesting case of the different ways to bring value as a scorer. We'll get more into it as we continue on, and especially when we do our comparing the top three guys. But it was a really fun experience, really unique.
Yeah. I mean, Peterson is while he feels sort of in a lineage of these like athletic shot making off guards, the Michael Jordans to Kobe Bryant's to Anthony Edwards of the world, right? Like I did feel strongly that Peterson is very distinct from that type of player, actually, even though there are some similarities in terms of like the mid-range footwork and everything. And that's like one guy I was thinking of while watching him was like an Andrew Wiggins, who was sort of the unsuccessful next up in that as there have been many, right? The Jalen Greens of like, this is an archetype that, wow, two of those names are legendary, and Anthony Edwards, good player, right? I have my issues with him. I still think he's a little bit overrated, but good player. I there's been a lot of there's it's all that success is built on a graveyard of misses on this type of player, and so that was kind of my concern before this deep dive. But I actually found him to be wholly distinct from those guys. Before I get into the stats, I do want to quickly talk about, I did some reading on Peterson and tried to kind of get a feel for what happened this year. And I'm not going to pretend like I have any specifics or inside knowledge. I don't know anyone on the Kansas staff. All I'll say is that of the articles I read of how Bill Self, who I think is generally a pretty professional guy, who knew that Peterson was here for 1 year and then was gone, like, and has had those types of guys before, as well as having, multi-year development NBA guys. I feel like this was something that has gotten overblown. Now, it was weirdly timed. And there are times where you're watching a game and you're like, oh my God, Peterson is fucking frying right now. And then all of a sudden, he's just not in the game anymore for like long stretches. He said he had like an experience where he dealt with like full body cramps during a week of running. Had to go to the hospital and get an IV, and it was kind of traumatic, and it's kind of messed with him all year. And then he's also had some cramping things in his hamstring and stuff this year. I hear that, and I'm like, I understand that, and I do think that a lot of this has gotten overblown. I don't want to color this conversation. There's a part of me that read it where it's like, yeah, we had this whole week where the basketballs were put away and all we were doing was running, and that caused me to have these issues where I'm like, that feels a little like, I don't know, like having coached now and dealt with guys like, and very talented guys who maybe don't like to do all the hard little things. Like, there's a part of me that read that and was like, maybe set off a little bit of a red flag, but I don't think any of this is red flag enough that it's going to like really color our discussion. But I just wanted to say it out front because people are going to ask about that and they're going to say, well, the reason I wouldn't draft him 1 overall is because I don't think he's reliable. And the thing I always tell guys with like those narrative based things is narratives change. Narratives change all the time in the league. The narrative of who the best players were, of who the worst players were. I mean, it always changes. Who Scoot was 4 years ago and who Scoot is now, like the narrative is different. It's just that it always changes, things always shift. And so I wouldn't get too bogged down in that. But Peterson himself is a January 17th, 2007 birthday. He's 19. His rookie season will be his um uh uh oh, that's crazy. Sorry, not to interrupt, but Mike Malone to North Carolina is wild.
That's a
Um,
crazy hire,
yeah,
but
yeah.
good for him.
It kind of makes sense because recruiting like doesn't matter as much in college basketball anymore. Like it's kind of just about your NIL money, and guys will go where they go. You
Do
have
they
to
have
have
a
a good fit.
GM?
But
They probably have a
they
GM.
probably do. And what's more important than your actual recruiting ties is your ability to, identify who will fit with who. Like a big part of what has made like Dusty May successful at Michigan is that he's like, yeah, Yaxel can play small forward for me. Like that's a baller move. I can't lie. And so, like that's the big success thing. Anyways, Darryn Peterson, January 17th, 2007 birthday. It's from Canton, Ohio. Went to high school in prolific prep. He is 19 years old. His rookie season will be his age 20 season, but just barely his age 20 season, much closer to his age. He's not not crazy old by any means. He this season at Kansas, he had a successful statistical year. In 24 games, he played 29 minutes a game, which is pretty impressive when you consider that there were multiple games where he sat out almost entire halves. There were also multiple games where he played like 37 minutes, including in I think both tournament games. He played like 34 to 37 minutes, something like that, like and played really well. He averaged 20 points on 43.8, 38.2, 82.6 shooting splits, got about 4.2 rebounds, 1.6 assists, 1.4 steals, zero point 0.6 blocks, 1.6 turnovers, and about a foul and a half. Some stats stand out to me. For the limited minutes he had, to have a 12.4 BPM is pretty good. Again, I'm not like a BPM truther. I actually think there's a people in stat circles are saying that we're dealing with BPM inflation right now, which is kind of a fascinating concept that I don't want to dive too much into, but interesting. Had a 30.9 usage rate, 52.7 effective field goal rate, and 57.8 true shooting. Neither of those are particularly good. I would say both are maybe not. I wouldn't say they're in the worrying category, but there are some issues with his scoring efficiency that we're going to talk about. 2.9 offensive rebound rate is very low. He was playing the two, you would say, for Kansas. There was usually three bigger guys than him on the floor. But that is still not a great number. 11.8 defensive rebound rate, avoids being horrible, right? 12.5 assist rate to a 10.4 turnover rate. 12.5 assist rate, not good, but 1.0 assist turnovers, okay. And he's but we'll talk about his positionality. Those numbers are more worrying or less worrying depending on how you view what he needs to do upon the positional spectrum. But some good numbers: 2.3 block rate, 2.9 steal rate. That's both of those are really good. 37.1 free throw rate is good. He dunked 9 times. Shot 40 of 67 or 59.7% on close twos. Just a very low volume there. And some of that we'll talk about is spacing, but not all of it. One of my bigger concerns is that low volume there. 124 long twos. He shot 42.7%. Good number, not an elite number. Shot well from the free throw line. Did take 13.9 3-point attempts per 100 possessions. Shot very well on them. A lot of those very tough. A fair amount off the dribble. Coop, as you kind of look at his statistical profile, what stands out to you?
I mean, just for the difficulty of shots, I think the efficiency is the big thing that'll stand out. I do worry that there's not a lot of close twos because there were a lot of times that he was asked to, or just did backdoor cut to kind of create with his off-ball gravity. And it feels like that was a really easy part of the offense for him. But I think that those kind of stand out to an outsized degree compared to like the times he was just given the ball and told to please just go do something for us. I think the three-pointer, the 3 points specifically, I mean, off the top of my head, I'd say most of those are either from NBA range or off the dribble. You would have the specific numbers on those, but he's like mostly tough threes, mostly unassisted. He is just kind of able to nuke guys at times. He can come off of a screen and hit it off the dribble. He reorients his feet really quickly. He's got a quick jumper. Um, it's not as flashy as some other guys, but I mean, for the amount he took, the difficulty, that's a really good number. And also, I mean, the defensive numbers, I think it really kind of just shows he's got this quick twitch athleticism that you kind of see when he really does set his mind to something. He can kind of dominate in a lot of ways. There's a lot of times where he'll just come out and it's like, hey, guess what? I'm more athletic than you, and there's nothing you can do about it, whether that's, on the ball, off the ball. He's just not always completely locked in on that end. He's got really good hands. You see it on the stat sheet. You see it play out on the tape. And I think you kind of see those stories play out really clearly.
Yeah, what's funny is like I do feel like again some of that narrative is that like he's not like a high motor guy, and I want to say he's like crazy high motor, but I thought he was pretty good defensively. I actually kind of want to start on the defense because our biggest concerns with both AJ and Cam were their defense. Even Cam, who had good defensive stats because of his positionality, his lack of athleticism is concerned there. I think AJ as like what I would say on his defense is the defensive floor is low because if he's a star in the league, then he probably is not going to play that hard defensively. But I do think his defense gives him a floor, and then I do think there's times he can really ramp it up. There are times where I think he looks really good on the ball in one-on-one situations. He is a kind of a menace in passing lanes, and he gambles, like he does gamble and get himself out of plays here and there, but not as much as you would think for someone who, again, that 2.9 steal rate is really good. Like you said, the quick twitch athleticism really pops. His first step to break on balls is elite. He has long arms. He has good hands, and he's a threat to get out there and punch one when he gets a steal. He is okay tracking guys through off-ball screens. The biggest defensive problems I would say are one. I do think the focus can kind of wax and wane. I actually think he does okay in terms of executing scheme, and there were a couple other guys on Kansas who really did not. Like both their bigs were pretty rough in terms of executing what their defensive scheme was. I would say that Trey White would kind of just do some random stuff sometimes. And Peterson could fall into that malaise. But he talks like he's switching when he's supposed to generally. He kind of knows where to be in help. He's not a crazy factor at the rim, but he's kind of athletic enough and long enough to block some shots, specifically in closeouts. His closeouts are pretty good, and I think he can kind of be someone who that improves in the league. And then his on-ball screen nav is pretty rough. He's still skinny, right? Like his positionality is a question because I don't know if he can guard point of attack well enough, and he's probably too skinny and weak to guard threes and fours in the league. And so when you're talking about someone who, if he has to be like a two guard only defender, that's a concern. But I do think there's kind of enough stuff there defensively to maybe give him a little bit more floor as like a solid okay 3-and-D off guard. Would you kind of agree with that? Do you have any thoughts on the defense you want to say before we kind of get to the offense?
I think the on-ball stuff on anyone who's around his size is like really good. Specifically, like you just said. Then I do think on a lot of smaller guards and against bad screeners, I think the screen nav is actually really good. And there's a lot of bad screeners in the NBA. It's one of my least favorite things. Whenever somebody actually goes and sets a real screen, I think he really struggles. But he is pretty good when he's actually communicating and having guys communicate with him at like, oh, there's a ghost screen coming. I'm going to execute here. I'm going to stick with my guy, or I'm going to go with the ghost. He just kind of knows what to do. He in a tight situation, you put him in an ISO situation down the stretch or at any point, like end of the clock, he's usually going to get a stop, or he's going to put some pressure on the offensive player. He's just got good hands. He's not really out of a play. Like you said, he's got kind of a tendency to kind of like, he'll have that malaise in the middle of a game. But when he's locked in, He's sticking with guys. He's, getting blocks from behind on guys who are way bigger than him. He'll go and fight for some rebounds. I think he's a lot better at Bonsa. I don't know exactly how their defensive rebounding numbers compare to one another, but on tape, you kind of felt Peterson's presence on the defensive boards a little bit more. And I just think this is a guy who, if he can put on a little bit more muscle, is kind of tailor-made for the NBA playoffs defense. He's good enough to not get picked on, because if you're going to waste time picking on this guy, you're just going to create a bunch of bad shots. Yes, you could pick on him eventually. Down the stretch, maybe you could get like a way bigger guy on him, but he's good enough at execution and he's good enough at on the ball defense, and like in the passing lanes, you're not going to like create a mismatch against him. Most of his defensive mistakes, to my eye, were, hey, Melvin Council got switched onto Koa Pete and I need to go help. And then I was there for a half second too long because Melvin Council refuses to fight around and or go switch or go get out to my guy, or he's just way too boxed out. He just doesn't tend to make a lot of active mistakes. And I think that is something that you can really use as a coach in the playoffs, to just be a cog in the machine of a successful NBA defense.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think he can absolutely be a part of successful NBA defense. And there's even a little bit of again, I wonder if he could ramp it up and if he can improve the screen nav. I don't think any of that is out of the question for him. But obviously the sell for him as an elite player is not defense, it's offense. I think that he is often framed as someone who is going to be this elite, or at least his sell coming into the year, this elite shot making two guard, right, in that Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant mold. I think his actual what his actual sell is as a star in the NBA is that there's a chance this could be one of the best shooters of all time. And that obviously sounds like a really high bar. But I do think that's really the sell. I want to talk about his shooting. I want to talk about it in a lot of depth. And so I spent an extraordinary amount of time breaking down his shooting, because I think shooting is generally one of the hardest things to project to the league, not in terms of will this guy make shots, yes or no, but in terms of the magnitude and level of shooter someone can be. I think a prime example, right? Buddy Hield drafted above Jamal Murray. Okay. Buddy Hield, great shooter, not a good enough shooter to be a star in the league, right? Steph Curry, when I spent time watching his college tape next to Buddy Hield's, Steph Curry, there are moments where you can be okay, Buddy is not too far away from Steph, in terms of prospect right? In fact, I mean, Buddy was a better athlete, dunked way more, right? All this stuff, bigger. But Steph is just that one or two levels of shooter above someone like Buddy. That's the difference between superstar, one of the best players of all time, and good bench wing. And so I watched a ton of former high level shooting prospects, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But first, just kind of some basic breakdowns on him. This year, as a freshman in college, Peterson was elite. 94th percentile on 113 catch and shoot shots, good for 66.5% effective field goal rate. I would say the vast majority of those were movement shots in some way and were fairly deep, like Coop said, a lot of NBA threes in there. He was in the 59th percentile on 121 off the dribble jumpers. Not great. That's not a great number. 43.4% effective field goal percentage there. Took probably a little too many. And again, we'll kind of talk about that when we talk about the advantage creation. A lot of really tough ones in there. Can make some tough ones, but also, I do feel like there's some issues with his proprioception in terms of his ability to read those off the dribble shots. In high school and AAU, way less prolific as a catch and shoot guy. did it way less. And again, these are Synergy's numbers. Synergy doesn't have every game he played across high school, and I don't even think all his three SSB games. This is a fairly limited sample here. A total of 62 shots across 17U and high school senior year, as tracked by Synergy, but both of them below 41% effective field goal percentage on those. But has always been a prolific off the dribble jump shooter, with the efficiency kind of varying, right? His AAU team was weird. He was not really playing with the ball near as much as you would think. He kind of like it was a lot more creating those jumpers off the dribble out of isolation as a senior in high school, and at Kansas, he was creating a lot more of those jumpers in pick and roll, which I think is better use of his talent. One of the important things is that I think he's gotten better as a shooter over time. And some of that is that he's changed his mechanics, especially on pull-ups. So he has the type of shot where he really varies it because he's a touch shooter. He's not Klay Thompson, where it's like Klay Thompson every time, no matter what, the same rhythm, the same like picture, textbook. This is what a jump shot should look like. He's a lot closer in terms of mechanics to someone like a Curry, where he's very touch based. His footwork changes all the time. How high he's jumping changes. Catch and shoots, he got to a point where it's almost a true one motion. I would still kind of call it a 1.5, but the ball's kind of coming up at one point, and then as he's getting to his apex, he's then pushing out and up a little bit more. It's hard for someone with long arms like him to be the true like Steph Curry one motion where it just goes straight up all the time. But I do think that, his catch and shoot mechanics look good. His off the dribble mechanics are weird because he sometimes jumps really high. He sometimes leans back. He does all these things where he's varying it based on the depth, the contest, all these types of things. But the important change for me is that he was more kind of bringing it to the side of his face. And then it was almost like a true two motion where he was getting like the ball was kind of moving separate as he was jumping. And then it was getting here as he was getting to his apex, and he was kind of almost shooting it all the way down. And he's really smoothed that out to where the ball's more in the front of his face. Even on his pull-ups, the ball is still kind of raising as he's going into a shot. Again, kind of a 1.5. Another kind of mechanics comparison I thought of was Damian Lillard, where especially on pull-ups, like it feels very Dame, not so much Steph. Like, Steph with how small he is and just like how his touch was, like, he was almost never, even on pull-ups, is not really jumping very high. He's all just kind of lean forward and flick it out, kind of finishing here every time. Dame and Peterson are similar in that they're better vertical athletes, and so they will do a little bit more stop and really cover ground as they're getting up, and then the ball will kind of come out from there. And so he's smoothed that out, and I think that's important. Like for someone who is already known as a shot maker, for me to see that he's meaningfully changed and improved his mechanics is a really good sign. But he's also so reliant on touch, and he has such good natural touch that he will just do random bullshit for no reason. Like there are times where it's like I just don't think he has to do some of the extra stuff he's doing, some of the dribbles he's doing, and he is. And one of the things that really has to improve for him is his proprioception. Like there are times where he has open threes off the dribble, if he will just pull it from there, but then he's taking an extra dribble into defense. It reminds me a lot of like what Keontae George used to do, where Keontae, we talked all the time about how he was very like, man, it's like he practiced all these moves against cones, and then he gets out in games and it's really hard for him sometimes to realize when he's open and when he should be taking shots because he's just like, well, this is the move. Darryn Peterson has a way more fluid and natural handle than Keontae had, but is similar in that I just don't think he realizes when and how he's open sometimes, and his ability to adjust the defense is not yet there. So that's a lot for me, and I'm gonna have a lot more on the shooting. Again, I think this should be the bulk of the conversation. But Coop, tell me, where are you at with him as a shooter? What things did you notice as you were watching him?
I think you talked about him as a touch guy. I do think that he's almost at this point. It kind of reminds me of the discussion of Zaire Williams when he came out. It's like, at what point do you have too much touch and you're just able to get away with too much bullshit? You're just so reliant on the fact that, like, oh, I can go up it from anywhere, that I don't even need to go get a good shot. And sometimes when the shot's not falling, he can just feel a little bit too much like, okay, I guess I'm in the lane. Time for a floater, 12-foot floater time. I can elevate over the defense. I can get it at any time. He's doing that early in the shot clock. It's like, you have your guy beat. You have shooters. Let's play it out a little longer, especially because when he decides to take the ball all the way to the rim, I think he's really good at like leveraging the threat of the jumper to create fun stuff. And he's super athletic, and he's got long arms, and he's got funky, finishes around the rim that he can get to. And he could have stood to use his athleticism to like dunk the ball a little more. I I do think that he just was too willing to settle too often. Despite the floor was a little cramped, not all these guys are like great shooters, or even if they are on Kansas, they're not good movers in the way that he is. Kansas's like best movement was throw the ball to like Badunga or Bryson Tiller at the top of the key, and then let Darryn Peterson fake like he's coming off a handoff and back cut, or actually use the screen, come off a DHO, just kind of give him an empty side. Because having guys like Trey White cutting through the paint was really just kind of a disaster a lot of the time. It's kind of a nightmare. I think the other thing is that I do really think that he struggled with like ISO situations a lot of the time. Right. So I thought he was really good at like, okay, here's the screen. I see where the other defender is. I can make that read now. And I know I'm going to come off the screen and take the shot. Right. Or, oh, I can stand here for a second. You're giving me too much space. Okay, I'm taking the shot. But if he sees a hard closeout, he's going to be like, okay, I can hit my little move. And he pump fakes, and then he takes the one dribble, and then he steps back. Oh, guess what? The defender was like moving the whole time. So you could have just pump faked him and stood there, and the defenders like would have like not been there to stop you. But because he kept moving, because he was so like out of control, like he's unable to actually read a lot of these situations in the moment as they're happening, and kind of needs the extra second. I think that's kind of caps off some of his like creator potential. Some people have kind of talked about him as a point guard, at least in the circles that I have been in, which has been not very many this cycle. Just because he's like, oh, he's 6'4", 6'5", he's a little skinny. Is this guy like a true primary guard? He can come off some screens and do some interesting stuff. But I think he's pretty clearly not a point guard, just with the way he reads the floor. Maybe he's a secondary guy. I think there's some room for some of this like one dribble pull-up stuff eventually, because there are times where he's able to really create off of a closeout with the threat of motion. But it is when he has a longer closeout coming out to him. It is when he has an extra second to read the rotating defense, when he does have the extra time to get into the paint and kind of slowly and methodically take everything in. That's when his best plays come, which is really, I think the weirdest part about scouting him is that, in comparison to, hey, dude, you're the twitchiest guy on the floor. You can do whatever you want if you just like go do it. Right. So it's a really weird experience at times. And I think that kind of contributes to sometimes he's dominating, and sometimes he's just kind of like nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, I think you said a lot of really interesting stuff there. I do want to say that I think for this level of guy, he's a really good off-ball mover. Like, not just in scheme stuff. I think he has good feel for finding little angles off the ball. He's not yet at like the I'm just going to run around all the time point, but I could see him getting there. Like, I never felt like he was disengaged on the floor. Again, for all the narrative stuff, like I felt like he was always engaged. He always kind of knew what was going on. This Kansas team did not have a point guard, and so like their offense was lacking a lot of flow. And so like his ability to find space and be involved in off ball actions, I think is good. Like I could see him being a really plus, DHO zoom guy, who is also, athletic enough to be a threat if you overplay him to cut. He's super twitchy. He's not super explosive. I don't think like he's not gonna dunk on a lot of guys. Like he's going to be I think always going to be a fairly marginal finisher. Again, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but he's not someone who is like just getting on top of the rim like that, but is athletic enough that he can be a threat in those off ball actions as more than just like you're not just gonna be able to fully top lock him and take him out of plays. He's going to have a little bit more juice there. The I think the fact that he improved so much as an off-ball shooter from year to year is just really promising to me. Like he really figured out how to set his feet quickly. He figured out how to access his touch kind of overall in just a really meaningful way, in my opinion. And again, that improvement rate speaks to me that there is something there in terms of his ability to improve. All right, I'm gonna do the nerdy thing now. I watched a lot of former guys who are mostly kind of currently in the league, but who were considered, actually, I think all currently in the league, but were considered these high level shooting prospects in some way or another, whether it be mid range shooting, like sort of like an Andrew Wiggins, whether it be off the dribble 3-point shooting, overall shooting. And here are the guys who I kind of found were most comparable. Okay, I think he's very comparable to Steph in that their touch reliance is very similar, and they're very similar in terms of like the audacity. Like, Davidson Steph was similar to Peterson in that he was just taking some stupid shit sometimes. And you were like, yeah, okay. Like, and his ability to get it on different platforms, different feel, different touch. So that's obviously the high end, right? And their stats were fairly similar. Actually, Peterson took more catch and shoot shots, obviously playing 10 less games, or I think 12 less games than Curry did, and shot better on those catch and shoot shots. But similar, fewer off the dribble total attempts, same just kind of weird touch, off balance, weird footwork cadence, like ability to just kind of pull up in this situation, an area where the defense like has no chance to contest because they're like, I've never seen anyone shoot that specific shot before. Same kind of weirdness there. Okay. I didn't find him particularly similar to like a Jamal Murray. Murray was way more form focused, way more consistent and rigorous, and also just took way fewer off the dribble or similar off the dribble attempts, but was way worse on them and way more long twos, less off the dribble threes. Peyton Pritchard, I didn't find them crazy similar. Pritchard also had like crazy audacity, but is just way boxier in his movements. And that's still the case. Like part of the reason Pritchard hasn't become like, is a really good, really, really good outside shooter and has become a really good player. And I think Pritchard is someone that I've learned a lot from. But part of the reason he's not like that top end of shooter is that he just doesn't have the fluidity to get into those shots in a lot of different ways. He's just so boxy in his movements, and that's not. I mean, as we talked about, Peterson is a super funky, fluid mover. I don't think he's particularly similar to Wiggins. I just think he's a way better shooter than Wiggins. That's obviously like the nightmare comparison is Wiggins also got compared to Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan. And now Wiggins was taller and Wiggins has had a very good career. Like if you're telling me that Darryn Peterson is just going to be Andrew Wiggins, I'd still say I'd probably draft him top 8 or so 5 to 8. But I didn't find them super similar. Keontae George, I thought they were very similar in that they had, like we talked about, they had that weird thing where it's like, I just don't know when I'm open sometimes. Keontae also had crazy touch, but Keontae has become like a really good NBA shooter, and he's really improved his flexibility. He did not have the type of flexibility and the type of quick twitch athleticism that Peterson had. And so there were certain types of shots that Peterson can get into that Keontae just couldn't access. But Keontae might have been a better, like, super contested lean away shooter, but he wasn't the gravity well that I think Peterson is. I didn't find him super similar to Klay Thompson or Tim Hardaway Jr. or Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards, so like I went back and watched him. It's like his form improvements are crazy. Like really shout out to him because I never would have guessed that would be a really high level NBA shooter. Buddy Hield, I found them similar in that they both have like this weird kind of cadence and motion. I mean, Buddy was insanely prolific. I mean, obviously, and Buddy was ancient, so like I understand, but like I went back going back and watching Buddy, I was like, yeah, I probably would have drafted him top like way higher than I should have too. Like he was really fun to watch. Buddy also kind of boxier in his movements though, but similar kind of touch base and kind of throw the hand away. The guy who I found very similar was Malik Monk. Monk was um, just a better overall athlete and was smaller, but was more of like a true like I'm running a million off ball actions type of guy, but less of a I think actually less feel for his off ball movement and also like less handle. I think Monk like got talked about as like Jamal Crawford at times back in the day, and like that's not at all who he was. Now obviously I wasn't really in draft circles at the time, like, but way less fluidity in the handle, a little bit more kind of wide, old school, like I'm getting outside, but it was a lot more like um, feel for move and everything. And so the reason I watched all these guys is because I think that the shooting spectrum of guys who are shooters in the league are already at this super high level. They were all mostly, pretty solid college shooters. There's very few shooting specialists who weren't good college shooters, right? The spectrum from are you a Steph Curry, Klay Thompson level guy who is a star based 90% on your shooting to like a Buddy Hield or a Malik Monk, like the fall off there is like in terms of shooting skill is fairly microscopic, right? And so what I found with Peterson, I think, is that his ceiling is best shooter in the world. Like I just think there isn't right now yet an heir apparent for Steph Curry in terms of who's going to be the guy who's just this crazy elite superstar level shooter. It could be Peterson. It really really could be. I think his touch is his touch is also similar to like Tyrese Halliburton. Hallie's a very different player in a lot of ways, but just similar in terms of just like every once in a while, like some of the shots they can hit. And it's like it's not always like the Anthony Edwards, like, oh, that's a crazy shot, or it's like this bump fade, like just super contested. It's like he's sprinting into something and he gets his feet set in such a weird way and then turns into it. And it's like it's a wide open three, but it's in such a motion. It happens so quick. And the arc is so pure. And it feels like the net barely moves, and so obviously that's like a little bit of like aesthetic thing like to it, but there is just that feel that like man there's just something special, and he understands it's his best skill. He tries to get to it all the time. He has just this insane natural touch. My concern is that the proprioception and the advantage creation are questionable enough for me that I'm not sure that he can reach out, because part of the thing for Steph is that his proprioception is elite, and so he not like he is the best shooter of all time. But even if he's actually like secretly the same level of shooter as Buddy Hield, he's like in terms of like true shooting talent, his ability to take advantage of it is what actually makes him the best shooter in the world. And so, Coop, I want to throw this to you. Tell me a little bit about how you felt about Peterson as an advantage creator.
I think he's good. And I think especially as an off ball guy, I think he's really good. He has a good amount of like jabs and like, oh, I'm gonna fling my guy's so scared of me going over this screen that he's overplaying it, and now I can back cut. And then like that's the kind of stuff that really impresses me. Or, oh, the play's kind of broken down and I see the perfect spot to like just book it to get an easy 3-point kick out. Like he's really good at that kind of stuff. Um, and then I think the handle is good enough for him to be like, oh, here's my guy. I can ISO on him. but his bag of like counters is not particularly deep. And I don't think his bag is just in general super, super deep. It's just entirely built on the threat of, hey, guess what? I could go over you at any time. But I do feel like he did eventually play teams that were like, okay, you can go over me at any time. I'm going to guard you like it. So you have to take a shitty jumper. And he did play demonstrably worse against some of those teams. You see a bit of a fall off against top 50 comp. And of course, everyone's going to have that. But he did struggle more getting to the rim and getting to his spots against guys who had the strength to kind of just be like, okay, beat me then. And he doesn't have like enough counters in his bag to really be like, hey, guess what? I'm going to create advantages a million times over. I to me, as an advantage creator, he almost reminds me of Jared McCain, right? Where it's like McCain on the wrong team. It's like I guess he's there. Like he was cool on the Sixers, and when he can go and get his own shot sometimes, and there's something there. But now he's on the Thunder, and it's like, oh shit, we traded the the fifth best shooter in the world for nothing because we employ an idiot at our head coach. And it just kind of feels like he has a very unorthodox style that kind of almost plays against and like aesthetically there's just this very weird it kind of reminds me of like his athleticism. He's like super quick twitch, but he's kind of a slow processor. And so there's this pull between these two facets of who he is. It's like, okay, well, there's the facet where it's like, oh, you're the star, you're the go-to guy. It's like, oh, but what I'm best at is coming off of a DHO and getting to my spot with a little bit of an advantage created for me and an elongated like space to play in. And so that's kind of my worry, but he's good, to put it bluntly, put it shortly.
Yeah. So I do think, like you said, there's these two worlds of Darryn Peterson, and one is Darryn Peterson, the off-ball scorer and advantage continuer, and one is Darryn Peterson, the standstill advantage creator. Darryn Peterson was bad in pick and roll ball handler situations this year, 43rd percentile in points per possession, and he did it a lot. It was his number 1% of possessions. He was an elite spot up guy, a pretty good off screen guy. I think a little bit less than I expected. I'll talk about that in a second. Good transition, good on handoffs. Better in isolation than I expected. The tape tells me that I don't think he's a good isolation player. Right now, his solution to too many problems is stop and pull up. And that's okay, but it's not really like I'm okay with like, I'm not an anti mid-range guy in the league or anything. Like, obviously, there's some very, very good mid-range scorers, and I think he can be a good mid-range scorer. It's too often his go-to in times where it doesn't need to be, and it happens a lot because his advantage is stymied. He is mostly because he's physically not strong enough. He just doesn't take good enough angles as a driver. He goes really wide. He goes wide off screens. He is not. When he initiates contact, it's to try and get fouls. And he's a great grifter. I mean, he's definitely watched a lot of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander tape in terms of like grabbing hands, in terms of trying to get a bump and then go through someone. He does a lot of that stuff really well. That'll be successful in the league. But he isn't able to get his shoulder down and get on a line and to create advantage going downhill consistently. Now, he needs someone to kind of get off balance so that he can beat them wide. And that, when he plays out of hesitations, he can look really good as a driver, right? But it's rarely in isolation. It's usually, like you said, there has to be a half advantage created for him. Now, I think there's a world that this can be one of the best off-ball scorers in the league. And so that's not the end of the world for me, because I do think his handle is really reactive. And I think that if he can, like you said, super quick, in terms of just like how fast can he dribble the ball between his legs, the answer is really fucking fast. Like he can just like throw the ball down and do all this stuff like really quick, because he does just have this natural, like his quick twitch muscle fibers, whatever it is, like are just really good. And so, and he also, I think partially like because of that kind of natural touch too, like I think it ties in, like has just like this natural feel for the ball and an ability to kind of shift his weight and his hips and the height of the ball, like all really naturally. And so when there's already this half advantage and his guy is behind him, he can be pretty manipulative. Um, the passing is definitely a question though. I think he's a good downhill passer. Like I think he sees the rim well, but he is only throwing kickouts when it's an absolute last resort. And lots of times he's jumping in the air and getting himself hurt. Now, I will say I do think some of the turnovers this year were not his fault. There were multiple times where it was obvious that Badunga or Tiller should have been rolling, and he threw the ball to where they should have been rolling, and they just weren't there. There were multiple times where a team can get away with just kind of sending two guys towards him without them being able to get punished. That definitely hurt him. But I think the passing will always be like, because I do think he's smart. I think his processing is slow, but his intelligence is high. Like he just has some feel for like I think he knows the sets and he knows where guys are supposed to be, maybe better than they do lots of times. And I think that shows up defensively. I think it shows up offensively. So even though he's not processing super quick and he's not able to read the defense super quick, again, in like an off ball scoring role, I don't think that's the end of the world. The problem for me is if he has to be a point guard. There's definitely some like he is point guard sized in that he's like really like 6'5" and he's super skinny. He's built way closer to like modern point guards like Tyrese Halliburton and Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and guys like that. He's built way closer to them than he is, the modern like star shooting guards. Okay, like the closest shooting guard comp I can think to him physically is Jalen Green, and maybe that's not fair. Coop, you tell me if you can think of anyone else, but it's definitely a concern for me, in that the league has kind of moved away from like these 6'5" skinny off guards. They want their point guards are either 6'1" and super strong and stout, or they're like 6'5" and skinny and fluid. And so I do think there's a world that he can bring the ball up. Like he never is just getting like ripped. And a lot of his turnovers that are off the dribble are because he's trying to draw a foul and he doesn't get a foul called and he just loses the ball. Like there were a couple times where he tries to do the pick up through someone's arms and he would just lose the ball thinking he was going to get a foul and he doesn't get foul. And, there's a little bit of that like kind of frustration to his game. But I just don't know that I buy point guard really, at least not point guard in the I'm going to be an advantage creator way. I think he could maybe be the, Keontae George point guard where it's like I'm playing in like a motion scheme and I bring the ball up and I do playmaking. Like I run some pick and roll and stuff, but I think he can be really good in like get actions. He can be really effective like in zooms in multiple scenarios. Like I think he can be a really effective piece of like a motion offense, but he's not going to be Jalen Brunson and he's not going to be a Tyrese Halliburton point guard, right? Like that's not who he is. And so as a star bet, he makes a little bit more sense to me as an off guard. But I will also kind of give the conceit that in the modern NBA, your point guard doesn't have to run 1,000 pick and rolls, right? Like so if he goes to a team that understands that and is creative enough with him, I think he can probably be the smallest guy on the floor, or at least the point guard in that like, you might have a 6'4" shooting guard who's strong and guards the point of attack. I don't know. I think that that's kind of my struggle for me. So where are you at with like his passing and his positionality, Coop? Where does Peterson kind of fall on that spectrum for you?
I think you basically took the words out of my mouth when you said he's not like he's smart. He's just a slower processor. Like he's a good one when he gets the time, but he's not. I think especially at the NBA level, like an adequately quick processor to really be a point guard. Um, I think positionality wise, he's kind of like the shooting guard of the modern era. If he was a little stronger or a little taller, this guy who's really good off ball movement, he can get you a bucket when you need it. Athletically and like physically, he's Ben McLemore. I I really like 6'5" Bradley Beal was the best I could come up with, and Beal's like gotten a lot stronger and just has I don't think his frame is like one that's not going to be put on weight. I think he'll definitely be able to put on some weight at the next level, but he's not like Scotty Barnes, where he's going to be able to come into the league and like just dominate guys with, the frame he's going to be able to put on. I think he's always going to be a little skinny, and he's not tall enough for like just his length and explosion to make up for that. He and Jalen Green have really similar builds, uh, but Jalen Green's athleticism is like completely different than his, where he has almost no micro like athletic traits, and it's all just like I'm going to explode and dunk over you or finish around you. And Peterson's entirely like quick twitch around you. Um, so that's a fun athletic comp, and I think comparing the two is a really interesting thought exercise. I think he's a really easy guy to hide because he can do some point of attack, and so he can be your one. But you don't want him going out there trying to guard Jalen Brunson. Like if you had OG come and set a screen, or Cat come set a screen for Jalen Brunson, it's like, okay, well, you're just kind of fucked at that point. Like he's not going to be able to fight through these like bigger guys and be able to guard these super crafty smaller guards, at least till he puts on a little bit more weight. But I could see it being something that he can do. And it's like, oh, he goes to the Wizards and he ends up being their point guard. I assume they don't have Trae Young, and then he plays next to Trey Johnson and Bilal, and he's just the smallest guy on the floor. But they have other guys out there to guard these superstar level players.
Yeah, I think that's all right. And again, I do think that it's important to remember, like, just because someone doesn't fill an archetype that is currently a superstar in the league doesn't mean they can't break through and be a superstar. Like, I do think that, again, Peterson, if he is a superstar, like a true like superstar, it looks way closer to Steph Curry than anyone else. I believe that strongly. Where it's like he's a point guard, but he's also just a monster off-ball mover, and he's just such a good shooter that he just completely warps defenses in a way that is, rarely seen. Right? Like that's the goal. And so, can he make the simple passes to take advantage of that? I think so. Like I think he's a good downhill passer. And so if teams are blitzing off the line, I think he can just throw little, short passes to the short roll. He's a good, like he has good touch on his lobs. He just, again, like he didn't play with a point guard, and I don't think that he didn't play with particularly good shooting. I thought his bigs were while talented. I think Badunga and Attila are both talented. I think we're both kind of bad fits with what he is and what he needs. Like he is not a guy that should be playing, a ton of pick and roll with like a Walker Kessler, roll hard to the rim type guy. But if you put him with like a Colin Murray Boyles, short rolling, making play, or Derek Queen, short rolling, making plays out of that every once in a while, hard rolling and athletic enough to, still get on the rim here and there. But like, then all of a sudden you're like, okay, that makes some more sense. So I do think his positionality is somewhat dependent on who he's with, but again, I don't think the passing is elite. Like he's not at all like a manipulative passer. He's definitely a score first guy. He wants to get buckets, and he takes a lot of bad shots. And so like I have all these concerns, right? Again, I don't think he's an elite athlete. I think he's a good athlete. I like that he can get up off one or two. Every once in a while, he'll dunk. He'll dunk like a really, really impressive one. Like the one he had against BYU was crazy. He had a couple going back to the high school tape I was watching where you're like, oh, okay, like he can get up off one or two, off the dribble, off ball, in transition, like, but he's not like a crazy high flyer. You're not going to run a ton of lob plays for him, and he's not going to like he's not Jalen Green in that way either, where he's going to be like just bringing the house down or anything. Like, but I think he might be a special shooter. If you were to have me talk about these top three guys, and I were to just rank their special skill, I think I'd probably have Peterson one. I think Peterson's special skill is maybe the most special. I think Boozer is a great passer. I think the Bonsta's interior finishing and foul drawing could be elite. I think Peterson's shooting is probably, at least to me, the best bet to be that type of high level thing. Now, I will say that the floor here, while I think it's a rotation player in the NBA, like I think he can guard enough. I think he can make enough. Like even if he's not that level of elite shooter, like if you're talking about if he is a Buddy Hield who plays a little bit better defense, That's still a really good player, like in the NBA. Is it a top 3 player in this class? No. So that, I mean, there's definitely some concerns there. And again, even Buddy Hield, I understand, is a high bar. Like Buddy Hield is an elite shooter, or at least was for a chunk of his career. But I also think like I don't think the shooting floor is super low. Like he's going to make shots in the NBA. He's unless he has a Markel Fultz car accident like that fucks up his shoulder, like he will make shots in the NBA. And he has the biggest concern for me with him is that he doesn't find a situation that works for him and he languishes. And instead of the type of player he could be, he's a lot closer to like he's like more on the Jalen Green to Zach LaVine, like off guard, tough shot maker. He's on that spectrum rather than the elite, off ball scorer spectrum that I think he can get on. But again, I like the improvement rate. I like what I've seen from him across levels over the last couple of years. Whenever he goes head to head with other top prospects, too, I think he just balls out. Like, if he had had just a healthy season this year, there's a part of me that wonders, like, would this have been a question? Like in big game, like, and again, I'm not like a big game clutch, like all that stuff. Like, I really try to avoid all that shit. But like, he was balling in the tournament, like balling, and he was great in a lot of big games. For there were multiple games where you're like, Kansas has no shot except for the fact that Darryn Peterson is just going fucking gangbusters right now. I don't know. Like he's a really tough guy for me because in general, like I don't value these like high level scorers who I don't feel like are great processors, but I do think he's smart. Like I think the feel is higher than a DeBonce, even though DeBonce had a higher assist rate. I do think his feel is better. I think that I think he can fit into more. So like the tough thing for me with DeBonce is everything will have to be about him, and I think that because I don't buy that the ceiling is like I think he'd be a good player. But if everything's about him and he's not like the Giannis of the world, then you're talking about like a solid power forward in the NBA who is making, who's going to be on max contracts and you're going to be a 5 seed forever. Peterson could be the type of star where you're like, that's a max contract guy. I think he's one of the best players in the league. I think there's that ceiling there, right? Like there's an MVP in here. It would be the highest of high shooting outcomes for him, but it's possible. I can believe it. He's still 6'5". Like if he is one of the best shooters in the world, he's 6'5". Like it's not like he's like again, a midget here. But there's also like, hey, if he's better defense, Tim Hardaway Jr., who slightly better shooting, slightly better, self creator, gets more investment. Tim Hardaway Jr. was like the 25th pick in his draft. Like if he's like, he's younger than a lot of these guys I watched when they were doing their stuff. Like there's still just like a floor there of like, yeah, he can just fit into more things and be a part of more different teams. And so I'm not sure yet where I'm going to rank him. I'm gonna save that for the pod, but I really like Peterson. I think the ceiling is incredibly high, and I think the floor is not that low. Assuming that again, if he falls, it's because the intel is really bad. It's because Self is, kind of pushing him back and saying, "Hey, this year was a nightmare" and whatever. And I don't know how much I buy all that stuff. Like I think guys fall for reasons like that all the time, and then it's kind of a waste. But I also like can understand things here and there. So, anyways, I've ranted and ranted for a long time. Coop, where are you at? Kind of wrap up your thoughts on Peterson here.
I think I just really struggle with perception versus what he's actually good at. I kind of talked about that before. There's this pull of, hey, you're the 2 guard. We need you to go get us a bucket. We need you to be our guy on the ball. And in the wrong situation, I mean that you could really see him not floundering, but struggling and really being stuck in this Jalen Green situation. And I think he's a better prospect than Jalen Green. I think he's a better shooter, which is the key thing. If Jalen Green could actually shoot, he'd actually be a good player to some degree. But I mean, Zach LaVine can shoot, and Zach LaVine's just been kind of completely misused completely overpaid and just really struggled in a lot of ways. We've seen guys like Bradley Beal who could add value to a team in a lot of ways, in a lot of similar ways. And being a guard who cannot consistently create all the time is hard, and you have to go to the right spot. There's very few guards who are unimpeachable in like the same way that an OG Anunoby is unimpeachable or a Kevin Durant is unimpeachable, where it's like they're going to go somewhere and they're going to do their stuff because every team needs this. Every team needs this exact thing that they do. It's very easy to see what they do, and there's not this distinction between what they're actually good at and what they do. If Peterson is just asked to be the on-ball guy, he'll still be good because he's good at it, but that really stymies his top-end outcomes where he gets to play with Isaiah Hartenstein when he, gets salary dumped this offseason. And hey, guess what? He's actually like first in rookie of the year voting, and he's dominating the league. And he was like almost on an all NBA team and like almost made the all-star team year one because he just like nuked the league, you know? Uh, so there's such a range of outcomes. And I don't struggle with the same thing with I'll save like the whole detail, but I don't struggle with the same thing with a Cam Boozer because you don't take Cam Boozer if you don't understand the special skill, right? Cam Boozer is not a top 2 or 3 guy if you don't get the special skill. Darryn Peterson aesthetically is still a top 3 guy that a bad franchise could take and mess around with and kind of stunt his growth. And that maybe that shouldn't be on him. Maybe that's not something that I should take into account, and maybe it's a little unfair. But that's something that you kind of have to think about with some of these guys. So I agree with you about the ceiling. I just worry that the floor is a little lower than we really want to admit, especially just in the wrong context.
Okay, I want to throw this at you, and you can cut this out if you don't like this idea. Should we just rank the top 3 now instead of doing a whole separate pod?
You want to just do that's fine by me because a whole pod might.
I kind of feel like we're going to be really stretching if we do a whole pod on it. You could, if you wanted to cut this and upload it as a separate like 15-minute YouTube video, you could too. It's up to you. But
I'll mess around with it in editing.
Yeah, and you just decide. But all right, let's talk about our top 3 here. I think we were maybe going to do it in a separate pod. And I think we're just going to do it here because I think it's really interesting. So we'll obviously throw some things back and forth, but Coop, I'm going to put you on the spot. How do you feel like you rank these 3 right now? And like, is there tier differences? Are they all kind of the same tier? Where are you at with things?
At the moment, I think I actually have each of them in their own tier in order. I think Cam Boozer I have at the top, and then Darryn Peterson, and then DeBonsa with a tier break between each of them. I think each of them has their paths to stardom that I think are really unique, but I think that the tier breaks both kind of show how likely I think the path to stardom is and also how low the floor is. And the more I've thought about it, it's like DeBonsa has this floor as just this insane free throw tank. It's like, I thought the exact same thing about Cam fucking Thomas. He shot 8 free throws a game at LSU, and I think DeBonsa's better. DeBonsa's a better player and a better prospect than Cam Thomas, and he's bigger and a better defender, which is a low bar, and he tries harder, and he's a smarter player. But you can't just look at that and be like, okay, well, he's going to 100% do this in the league in the same way that I really thought. And especially if that's his like one special skill, I don't value that special skill as much as I value the fact that to me, Boozer has 2 special skills, like truly special. And Darryn Peterson, his one special skill, he's actually like good at using it all the time. And it's more, you can use this for 48 minutes of basketball. There's not the 30-70 split where, oh, you can only be on ball for 30% of the game. And so that just loses so much value to me.
Yeah. So we have the same ranking. I have Peterson and Boozer in the same tier. I think there are probably about 7 to 10 teams where I'd probably rather take Peterson in the whole league, and so that's why I have them in the same tier. Now, let's talk about. We should probably focus on DeBosa first. So we obviously did a whole pod on DeBosa, and I think we ended the pod trying to be very positive. Again, my biggest concern is that I think everything has to be about him, and I'm just not sure that he's that level of guy where he warrants everything being about him. The shooting really concerns me, and the awful defense really concerns me. Like he is like DeBosa is far and away the worst defender of these three, not even particularly close, and also the least scalable offensively. Now, I think the likelihood that he is like an all-star level player is maybe the highest of these three. But again, I don't really value like all-star level player. I want like high All NBA, high playoff performing bets, and so that's why I lean Peterson and Boozer. I think Peterson. I think again the reason I prefer him so comfortably to DeVos is like you said. I just think his impact is going to be more consistent. It's going to be on both ends of the ball of the floor. Even if it's not even if the defense is fairly mediocre, I think he can both avoid target status and at least give you some benefit as like a steals guy. He finds a way to be productive. Like there are multiple times where Kansas, there'd be a team would get 3 offensive rebounds, and then Peterson was the one that would go crashing at the ball. Like, there's just kind of a little bit of like toughness to him, I think, that is maybe lacking with some with the Bonsta at times. And I just think he's like, if you're asking me what version of star I prefer, someone who needs the ball all the time or someone who can exist in a more cohesive ecosystem, I'm going to choose the more cohesive ecosystem guy. Even if there are times where the guy who needs the ball all the time is going to be your superstar Giannis MVP type guy. And we've seen this with Giannis. Like if the Bonsta reaches the Giannis heights, which is very, I'd be shocked because part of what made Giannis so good was his defense, and DeBonsa will never ever be the defender Giannis is. What does it like? At least 25% of Giannis's career, he's been impossible to build good teams around. Is that his fault? Is it the Bucks' fault? I think there's questions, but it's the truth of what's happened. And I think I could very easily see that with the Bonsa. Now, if the Bonsa's shooting gets to a certain level, like maybe there could be a little bit of second attack, like second side attacking, but I just don't like his feel that much. I don't think his understanding is that high. So again, I think there's only so low you can get on him, but comparing him to these other two, I just can't get as excited about him. And then again, the reason I have Boozer 1 over both of them is like I just think the passing can be so special. And passing plus physicality and size, he's just won everywhere he's gone. Again, I have concerns. I think all the fit concerns are valid. I think there's some positionality concerns. Again, if he's not a good shooter, what does he look like? I think all those are real. But I just think Boozer is just truthfully, I think when it comes down to it, I think Boozer is just the best player of these three. I think he's just better at basketball than the other two. Now, again, the reason I have him and Peterson in the same tier is that I think Peterson's scalability makes a little bit more like hand in glove sense to me. I think his floor is actually a little bit higher than Boozer's, just in that, I think the shooting is kind of a sure thing skill. And so I have them in the same tier, but I do have Boozer 1, Peterson 2, DeBonsa 3. Is there anything you want to say on those three guys? And then Coop, I do have another question I want to ask you, but like on those three and their ranking, is there anything else you want to say?
I will just say about Boozer, the thing that really stood out to me that has me like even higher on him than I thought I was coming into the year, despite like, some people are down on him, some people don't, they're not as sure about him, is legitimately like since I like the last 2-3 years or so, I've been trying to build my own personal philosophy around special skills. Guys who are good at basketball tend to just be good at basketball. Keep it simple, play good basketball. That's it. And I don't think I've seen someone who is as good, like as truly elite, like outlier elite in multiple areas as Boozer is on the boards and as a passer. and so the rest of the flaws kind of become easier for me to overlook. And the thing that kind of has me worried with Peterson is it's a special skill, but I feel like I've just been burned too many times in the past by it's like, oh, this guy's a really good shooter. Oh, he's like a special shooter. It's like, oh, he actually like fucking sucks at shooting in the NBA. Like, I have yet to see a guy who I'm like, oh, this guy's an elite playmaker. He truly reads and sees the floor at this level, not see the floor at that level in the NBA. Right? The shooting, I'm just not as sure of, um, and that's kind of my tier separation between the two of them.
Yeah, I think that's fair. My pushback would be that um, I just think again, for me, it's all there's also a little bit of like I think there's like the 30 to 95 percentile outcomes for Boozer are better. That top 5 percentile outcome for Peterson, I again, I think it's potentially all world. And anyway, again, I think Boozer can be one of the better offensive players in the league. I do have some questions about like in a championship series, if they're both at their 99th percentile, who do I prefer? A part of me thinks I prefer Peterson. And so again, that's part of why I have them in the same tier. Kind of last question I got for you here. Do you feel like those three will remain in tiers of their own, or do you feel like guys can break into either of the tiers as we move forward here?
I think guys will definitely break into the Devonta tier. And there are some talents in this class who I can see making it into uh, Darryn Peterson's tier. I'm going to go back to my board from last year. If I can find it. I had two guys in the current tier that I have Darryn Peterson in, and I had two guys in the tier that AJ Devonta, no, yeah, AJ Devonta's in. And I think that there's multiple guys at that level, at both of those levels, who uh, could fit in there. I've seen a little bit of almost everybody in this class, and I don't think anybody is on the level of Boozer. Boozer is um, incredible in a way that just many guys aren't, to my mind. And you know, maybe Caleb Wilson comes out of the blue and really just blows me out of the water athletically. You know, the Evan Mobley stuff, but he's Evan Mobley, but he's actually like got that motherfucker to him. Like, okay, I guess he'd be at that level, but I just don't personally foresee anyone jumping into that Cam Boozer tier for me.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think anyone will get into that top two tier for me. Again, I do think those guys are like a tier below like the top end like prospects the last few years, like a tier below the Flags and the Wembys and the kind of maybe Cade. I liked Cade a lot. Boozer reminds me a lot of Cade in some ways. So I don't know. Like again, like where you draw those lines, like I do think Flag and Wemby were better prospects than those top two guys, but I don't think anyone in this class will break into that group because I don't think there's very many classes that have three guys that I view as that level. Um, I do think guys will get into the Devonta tier, and my guess is that I will not end the year with Devonta at 3 because I prefer some guys who I maybe think are going to impact winning, even if I think they're going to be less star outcome type guys than Devonta would be my guess, but we'll see. I mean, again, you can only get so low on Devonta when I feel pretty strongly that he's going to be a solid offensive player in the NBA, but I just I I think guys will at least be in that tier would be my suggestion. But anything else you want to say on this top three debate? I'm sure we will talk about it again, but just the way we do things, it's not like we're the type of podcast that's going to go back to this top three debate every week because our opinions are probably fairly unlikely to change that much. Any other thoughts you want to get off your chest on these guys?
Is it crazy to prefer Boozer to Flag? Is that like an insane take here?
I don't think it's crazy. I just again the thing that kind of sticks for me is and Boozer are the same age.
That
And
is
Flag is
true,
already in the
but
league. Um, you know, I I think Boozer probably has a higher offensive ceiling than Flag. Now there are people who are really hating on like Flag's defense this year. It's because he's a power forward who's been playing shooting guard all year. Like some people have got to relax. Like they have to relax. Like and his contest percentage at the rim has still been at the level of like an average power forward. Like he's still like he's outside of his elite role. He is not a very good isolation defender. He never has been. That's not the thing with him. Like he should be around the rim, closing guys down on closeouts, but mostly as an off-ball defender, nail defender, second side rim protector. People have got to like, the some people like their willingness to try and spin narratives a certain way is just it's insanity to me. Like Cooper Flag is really good. I don't think you're crazy if you prefer Boozer to him. I do think Boozer's offensive ceiling is probably a little bit higher, but I think Flag's overall impact and like the expected outcomes for me were so much higher that I don't even know that I would have them in the same tier, if that makes sense. But give us a little bit of why you feel like you might prefer Boozer.
I think obviously it comes down to the offense. I think that the highest end outcomes of what Boozer adds on the offensive glass, I think that the more I've thought about it, he is the ultimate in terms of like he's the hyper optimized offensive power forward in literally every way. Unless you don't buy the shooting. This is a guy who can run in any scheme on offense. He can spread the floor. He can bust a zone. He can do whatever you need him to do. He can even just pick and roll. And then he can go be an interior scorer. I mean, we just saw Ivica Zubac be one of like the 5 best offensive centers in basketball. And Boozer's like 3 times better than him at every point of his career. And I think that, especially because there's been a bit. Sorry, I'll just edit that out. There's been a bit of a drop off in terms of like defensive bigs who can actually like truly guard in ISO and get stops. And, we even see that with like Gobert. Gobert's not like a particularly good isolation defender. He's great in scheme and he can guard, but if you can get him with the up fakes and the touch shots, you can get him out of position and kind of bend the rest of the defense to your will. Şengün, when he is like actually hitting his layups, is unstoppable, and Boozer's better than him. Like Boozer is able to get in there and create the same level of advantage and can actually like pass out of it. And he has the necessary ball handle to really get into the teeth of a defense. It's just such a unique combination that we don't see in the modern era. And I think he's just so good at both that he could almost like bend the NBA to his will stylistically. And we're going to see, is this guy the next Boozer or Şengün? And they're just all going to stink because it's like, every team needs this guy on offense. Like I'm glazing a bit, but I think he's just absurdly good in so many ways that modern teams desperately need.
I do think that there's definitely an argument that Boozer is the most unique of this trio and maybe the one who is most likely to be like a different type of star. And that's always a valuable thing, right? Like, now again, I do think, the highest end outcomes look at least a little bit like a Jokic type guy, but I understand what you're saying with that. So I think that's a fair point. That's all I got. Coop, anything else?
Flag's really good. I forgot to bring up why he's technically better than Flag. But Flag's just really good. So don't take that as a dig at him.
Yeah. So Flag is the tough thing for Flag is he gets to the point where he is hopefully like a championship top 5 in the league type guy. Is just how efficient is he as like an outside scorer, and how much like how ball dominant can he be, or how much does he have to be in a scheme that's more kind of egalitarian, I guess. Like, he's really effective attacking the basket right now, and he'll make some shots in the mid-range, but his 3-point shot's kind of been up and down. I think his playmaking is good, not great. He, the tough thing with Flag is he's like this jack of all trades, master of none in some ways, except for that kind of tenacious motor defensively. And so I do think there's definitely still some questions there about what it looks like for him at the highest of high ends. And so if guys get into that level, if they're top 10 players, then what does that look like? I think that's still fair. But okay, all right. Well, this has been great. Give us a like, rating, review if you're listening to this. If you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe, comment. Let us know what you think about the top three and about Peterson, because I think that Peterson's a great test case in some ways for how people view the game and what they value. And how people see him, because again, I do think the way a lot of people talk about him as a star is very different than how we talked about him as a star. So tell us if you think if we're right or if you think other people are right. Would love to hear your thoughts down below. This has been the Upside Swings NBA Draft Podcast. We hope that are sealing. Thank you.